The topic we're going to discuss is FSMA Preventive Controls Rule, Fully Covered Facilities. Please be noted that the information provided in this module does not and is not intended to constitute legal advice and are for general informational purposes only. Here are the topics we will cover in this presentation. All facilities that manufacture, process, pack, or hold human food are covered by the Preventive Controls for Human Food Rule. For facilities with sales over $1 million adjusted for inflation, the full requirements of the rule will apply. Today we will go through the general requirements, noting that there is a full 2.5-day training course that covers more specifics. For a business fully subject to the Preventive Controls for Human Food Rule, the full requirements under 21 CFR Part 117 apply. These food businesses are required to implement good manufacturing practices and other prerequisite programs, including sanitary operation procedures. These facilities need to develop and implement a food safety plan. A requirement of part of that food safety plan, and indeed the foundation of it, is conducting a hazard analysis. Fully covered facilities also need to register with the FDA and will be subject to inspection. In Washington, the Washington Department of Ag will conduct FSMA Preventive Controls for Human Food inspections. In California, the Department of Public Health Food and Drug Branch will be conducting FSMA Preventive Controls for Human Food inspections. There are 3 general types of hazards that can occur in food and lead to foodborne illness. The first are physical hazards. These are items like glass, metal, bones, wood, etc. that inadvertently end up in food and can cause damage to the mouth of digestive tract if ingested. The second type of hazard are chemical hazards. Chemical hazards include allergens, chemicals from processing or sanitizing, mycotoxins produced by mold growth, among others. The big 9 allergens required for control in the U.S. are dairy, eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, crustaceans, wheat, soy, and sesame. The last group of hazards are biological hazards. This includes microorganisms transmitted by food, which includes types of bacteria, viruses, and parasites that can cause illness in humans if ingested. The Preventive Controls Rule for Human Food requires food processors to identify these hazards that can impact the safety of their products. If a hazard is considered reasonably likely to occur in the product, the manufacturer is then required to implement a preventive control to minimize the risks associated with that particular hazard. There are numerous potential sources of these hazards. Some may be associated with the ingredients used in the product. Others may be introduced from the processing environment, while others can be sourced from people. When going through the process of identifying reasonably foreseeable hazards in a product and process, called a hazard analysis, it is important to consider all these sources. The Preventive Controls for Human Food Rule is based on developing risk-based preventive controls for food safety hazards. By applying a systematic approach to identify the most likely hazards to impact a product, and developing a system to prevent these risks associated with food safety hazards can be minimized. The preventive controls work in conjunction and are supported by other programs like Good Manufacturing Practices. The Preventive Controls for Human Food Rule aims to have food processing facilities build a food safety system. Good manufacturing practices form the base level actions that must be taken to mitigate food safety risks and serve as a foundation for a food safety program. We have one module that focuses on GMPs but includes aspects such as ensuring employees wash hands and that equipment is routinely cleaned and sanitized. After GMPs, the hazard analysis is the next most important piece of the food safety system. It involves a systematic review of your process, highlighting all potential hazards in your product and process. These hazards are then ranked, either as being controlled by prerequisite GMP programs or as reasonably foreseeable and requiring a preventive controls to be implemented to reduce the risk. There are 4 types of preventive controls that may be implemented, including process controls, formerly called critical control points. These controls involve activities in the facility to control a hazard, such as thermal treatments or acidification. Sanitation preventive controls manage hazards in the environment that may cross-contaminate ready-to-eat foods. Allergen controls aim to reduce allergen mislabeling, and supply chain preventive controls require supplier verification for ingredients that may harbor a hazard if not controlled by the supplier. The hazard analysis, preventive controls, and all other documentation related to monitoring, verifying, and corrective actions of the preventive controls make up the food safety plan. Finally, a recall plan is required that outlines procedures in the scenario where a food product must be recalled. A food safety plan is necessary for food processors fully covered by the preventive controls for human food rule. The food safety plan is required under the preventive controls for human food rule, and it must include certain components. A hazard analysis is a mandatory part of the food safety plan, and training courses and templates are available for conducting such an analysis. This represents the minimum requirement for the plan. If one hazard is identified as requiring a preventive control, the other section in the blue box is also necessary. It is very rare to have a food product without a hazard required a preventive control. The preventive control must be defined within the food safety plan and include validation studies demonstrating that the control does indeed minimize the identified hazard. A recall plan is also required if at least one hazard requiring a preventive control is identified. Additionally, the procedures for monitoring, verification, and corrective actions must be included, along with documentation reporting that these activities occurred. While other information is useful to include in the food safety plan, it is not required. The food safety plan must be specific to a facility, and preventive controls should be tailored to a product and a process. Similar products can be grouped if hazards and controls are managed generally in the same way. All biological, chemical, and physical hazards must be addressed. Format of the food safety plan is flexible. There is no specific template or form that has to be used. However, there are some useful templates available for use. If electronic records are used, they must adhere to certain standards to ensure that they cannot be altered after the original generation. The food safety plan itself must be created by the preventive controls qualified individual. Now I will walk through the main organizational sections of a food safety plan, providing more detail about each. The first section, background information, is optional but very helpful for the food safety team, management, and inspectors because it provides context to the entire plan. This information can include the facility overview, containing details such as square footage, products made in the facility, operational hours, number of staff, and the food safety team. A product and process description are also beneficial, offering a description of what you are making, how it is processed, packaged, and stored. A flow diagram is very helpful as well, providing step-by-step details of the entire process of making the product from receiving ingredients and packaging to final storage and shipping. The flow diagram is a recommended tool to help conduct a hazard analysis. Each step in the process outlined in the flow diagram needs to be addressed during the hazard analysis. After the hazard analysis is completed and controls for identified hazards are required, it is time to determine which type of control to utilize. Process preventive controls, formerly termed critical control points under the HACCP system, involve actions or controls during the process to minimize a hazard. This could include cooking for a specific time or temperature, requiring a specific pH or water activity to be achieved, etc. The documentation for process preventive control includes critical limits for the control, specific parameters that need to be achieved to control the hazard, and process control validation, which involves work done by you or others to demonstrate that the specific parameters of the control address the identified hazard. Allergen preventive controls are established to ensure that the appropriate allergen-containing labels are placed on allergenic products. Specific details on this process are required to be documented. Additionally, if a unique allergen is present in a product within a facility running multiple products, a plan for minimizing allergen cross-contact must be established. Sanitation preventive controls involve rigorous cleaning and sanitizing process, aiming to control environmental pathogens like Listeria monocytogenes and Salmonella or prevent allergen cross-contact. Supply chain preventive controls are implemented when a hazard is identified in an ingredient, but the facility is relying on a supplier to control that hazard. A written recall plan is required for any product where at least one hazard requiring a control is identified. There is a fairly comprehensive example of a recall plan from the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance Preventive Controls Qualified Individual Manual, which you can download for free. This is the table of contents for that example recall plan. It is important to have a team defined, a strategy for communication with regulatory agencies, customers, and the general public. Information on the products, lots, costs, volume, etc. of the product being recalled should be included. A traceability system should be in place to allow for connecting all individuals who may have the product. Lastly, there should be a plan for what to do with the recalled product. The remaining section of the food safety plan includes everything needed to implement the plan. This includes validation studies for your preventive controls, process only, records for monitoring preventive controls, verification activities related to monitoring preventive controls, and any corrective actions taken due to a process deviation from the established preventive control. A preventive controls qualified individual needs to prepare the food safety plan. This can be someone in-house or external, but it is important that they know the business well. Some consultants may provide a very generic food safety plan that may not reflect what is actually happening in the process. A PCQI also needs to perform preventive control validation, participate in records review, and conduct a reanalysis of the food safety plan. Registration with the FDA is required and can be done online. Registration renewal is required every 2 years. Here's the general type of information needed for FDA registration: company name, location, and details on what you are making. None of this is set in stone, but depending on your location and the risk level associated with your product, the frequency of inspection may be much higher than this. In California, for low-acid canned food producers, you will have many inspections for all products leaving the facility. For other types of processing, those inspections will more likely align with the estimates provided here. Of course, many kinds of violations can occur. Just to give you some ideas in a small-scale environment, here are some common findings. Lack of barriers to inhibit pests from entering the processing area or having a facility constructed with materials that do not allow for proper cleaning and sanitation is a common issue. Other frequent finding is the lack of proper record keeping, which could be related to sanitation specifically or other documentation needed to implement the food safety plan. Here are some resources related to this presentation.